All right. Thanks for joining us this lunchtime on a Monday. Today, we are talking about the upcoming changes to Medicaid or the changes that have just happened. So, upcoming is maybe not accurate anymore. The recent changes. And today, we're going to talk specifically about the assessment process for unskilled care. And I have it in quotes a lot. I don't put it in quotes every time, but just my way of saying I don't love that terminology. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here soon. But that is our topic of conversation for today. All right, let's get going. So, just a quick overview. Who are we? My name is Megan Bowser. I'm the executive director over at Family Voices Colorado. We are a family led nonprofit, so all of our staff are parents or siblings of somebody with a disability. And we provide free assistance to other families. So, that assistance can look like trainings like this one. It can look like advocacy as sitting in lots of meetings, sharing the stories we've heard from families, helping shape policies both at the legislative level and the state level um, to try to make programs work better for our families. And then it can also look like system navigation. So one on one help to other families that can be as kind of intensive or as minimal as you need. So sometimes that looks like one conversation where we talk about your specific situation with one of our family navigators and help you come up with a plan for what's out there, what services might be available, how to connect to those, how to connect to other families, whatever the needs really are. Or that can be as intensive as following and working with you on all the way through all the applications all the way through. So we provide that one-on-one navigation as needed. And then just letting you know we're an affiliate of Family Voices National and the Family to Family Health Information Center for Colorado. Just share that so you know we are one organization for Colorado, but there are other entities like us in other states. So if you have friends in other states or you're thinking about moving to another state, there's somebody like us there. And then our website and our main contact info there too. Oh, that's the other piece. Let me stop sharing for a second so I can give you the link to the presentation so that um, you can follow along on the slides if you want. All right. And oh, I can hear you on my end again, Hilda. I'm not sure why though. Okay, perfect. It was intentional. Okay, in the chat is the link to this slide so you can see all the links and stuff as we go along as well. All right, our timeline for today. So, introduction housekeeping, we'll do some presentation time, and then I hope to leave a significant amount of time at the end for questions. I'm going to record the first part of this presentation, but I will stop it when we get to the more open Q&A section. And a big part of that is please refrain from sharing personal medical details while we're recording. So while we're recording this, we would like to put up on our YouTube channel. So if you ask questions while the recording is going, please keep them general, less specific to your individual situation so that we're not sharing all of your personal info or your family members' personal info out on the internet and YouTube at large. But I will stop the recording and give time for those more individual questions that may help others as well towards the end. You can also contact us and get connected with one of our family navigators to get those one-on-one longer conversations done too. All right. Just a couple housekeeping things. If you can keep yourself muted when you're not actively talking, that helps us a whole lot in order to not have all the background noise. So there's a lot of you on here, and so we don't want to hear your dogs barking or whatever else is going on in your world. So if you keep yourself muted when you're not talking, that would be great. And then I'm presenting on what I know to be true right now. Things perpetually are changing. Thankfully, this week, a couple weeks ago, things changed like right before we started the presentation. No big changes happened today that I know of so far. So hopefully this will be accurate information for a while. But as things change, we try to give updates. But I'm just letting you know what I know to be true today at this very moment. That may change. All right. And then don't shoot the messenger. These are not my programs. I am here. I'm trying to provide as much info as I can, equip you the best we can within these programs. But these aren't my programs. So I'm giving you the info. But when you have issues that rise up with them, we're happy to help support you. But no, I did not create these. So if you're mad about them, please don't be mad at me. I'm just trying to help. So, all right. I have a couple of staff that are on that are going to be monitoring the chat for me. If I try to speak and present and watch the chat at the same time, I get very confused very quickly. So they're going to be watching the chat for me there and answering some questions in the chat, and then we'll do ones live and via voice also. So if you've got questions, feel free to put them in the chat or to raise your hand and we will happily answer them. We want to give lots of time for that. All right, let's get started. So, healthcare policy and financing, aka HCPF, this HCPF acronym, has deemed this whole group of projects their priority projects. So it's a lot of things that started July 1st or some that got extended to August 1st, but many things that were kind of happening all at the same time within the state. So one of the big ones of this, maybe the kind of one that lots of these other programs pivoted off of, is this one called Community First Choice. And part of Community First Choice is these services that are called skilled and some services that are called unskilled. Many of these services already existed in other programs, but they're more widely available now thanks to Community First Choice. So we'll talk more about those. 2 weeks ago, we talked about the skilled services. So that's more medically based services. And that recording is up on our YouTube channel. If you want to go check that out, there's lots of info there. Today, we're going to talk more about these services they call unskilled. All right. So types of care needs. So there's these two kind of buckets Medicaid likes to put care needs in. So one they call unskilled, one they call skilled. I don't love these terminology because many of the things that are in this unskilled bucket require a lot of skill, a lot of talent, a lot of training to be able to do and do well. They're just not considered medical needs. So anytime you hear the word skilled, think medical. Things usually done by a nurse assistant or a nurse. There's more medically based needs versus unskilled is talking about everything else. So high behavioral needs, unskilled. Not behavioral, just cognitive needs, unskilled. Physical needs that aren't medical, unskilled. So really anything that doesn't fall in that really medical model falls in this unskilled category. Okay. So unskilled is also what's beyond typical parental responsibility. So changing the diapers on a 2-month-old. That's not unskilled or skilled. That's typical parental responsibility. That's something any parent would have to do for their 2-month-old. So that's not included in either one of these categories. So there's maybe a third category that's like normal parental responsibility, then unskilled care and skilled care. And this nursing or CNA level is sort of the big differentiator between this unskilled and skilled. All right. So within Community First Choice, there are a lot of services that are in Community First Choice, but these are kind of the big three, the main three that most people will use or at least want to explore whether they apply or not. So the first one is Homemaker. This one is considered unskilled, and this is things like cleaning. So this could be doing laundry, this could be cleaning toilets, this can be cleaning kitchens. It can also be this appointment scheduling, it can be preparing meals. All those things fall under Homemaker, and it's all considered unskilled. Versus personal care is beyond what's typical parental responsibility. but it's not medical needs, but it's help with these activities of daily living. So, helping somebody bathe that doesn't have some significant medical needs would be a personal care task. Or helping somebody get dressed that doesn't have braces or orthotics or any special clothing they need. They just need assistance getting dressed. That would be personal care. This also has a service called protective oversight that is really about intensive supervision needs. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But all personal care things are also considered in this unskilled category. Versus there's this skilled category. So skilled can be through community first choice. All these skilled needs are called health maintenance activities. There's also skilled care that's in regular Medicaid or your state plan Medicaid, not community first choice, that could be helped by a CNA or helped by a nurse. That would be part of this skilled care kind of place. But in community first choice, they lump all skilled care together under this activity called health maintenance activities. And this is when you get to more medical things. So, not necessarily just helping somebody eat, but doing a G tube feed or helping somebody eat that's at risk of choking. Those sort of things fall in this health maintenance activities section. All right. So, let's do a couple examples. So, what's unskilled versus skilled, and what might be typical parental responsibility? So, for example, dressing, and this comes from this little screenshot here on the top comes from the assessment that the state's using now for determining all of these services. And we'll look at that assessment itself here in a few too. But dressing, for example. So, dressing a 6-month-old who doesn't have braces, nothing special, no tubes, no nothing. Dressing a 6-month-old would be typical caregiver responsibility. I've yet to meet a typically developing 6-month-old who could dress themselves. So, that might be typical responsibility. Versus a personal care level of dressing might be a 10-year-old who still needs help getting dressed, but they don't have any special braces, they don't have a G tube, they're not wearing oxygen, but they need help getting dressed still, or even getting dressed appropriately. Maybe they're going to put the totally wrong clothes on, or they might put their pants on backwards, whatever. They need some assistance with dressing. That would fall in this unskilled category. Versus skilled dressing could be a 2-year-old, or could be a 20-year-old, or could be an 80-year-old, but somebody who has a G tube, for example, or wears AFOs or braces on their ankles. So it's special orthotic devices that would make that dressing task fall into that skilled category. It matters because, like, typical caregiver responsibility or typical parental responsibility is an unpaid thing, right? Parents aren't getting paid for taking care of their kiddos. So anything that falls in that category, nobody gets paid for. Versus personal care, somebody can get paid for, but it pays at a lower reimbursement rate because it doesn't require as much training or as much intensity. Again, the system is biased towards medical needs, but that's kind of the way it's set up. Then the skilled care is that more medical needs. So that is also somebody can be paid to do that task, and it gets paid at a higher reimbursement rate. So a higher pay rate per hour than the personal care tasks do. All right, so another example, let's talk about medications. Medications by face value seems like a skilled medical task, but there are times when medication reminders might be typical parental or might be personal care as well. So, like, you've got a 2-year-old who has a fever and needs some Tylenol for it. That would be typical parental responsibility. It's not related to a disability at all. It's just a thing that a typical 2-year-old needs when they're not feeling well. And that would be for somebody that doesn't have any issues with swallowing, can take regular children's medication. Versus personal care might be if you've got one of those fancy med reminder boxes, where you put in the AM, these medications need to be taken Sunday morning, whatever. Handing that medication box to a 12-year-old and saying, don't forget to take your medications, and then that's all you have to do, that would be medication reminder. That's personal care. So you're giving those reminders, you're telling them to do it, but they're able to do the task independently with those reminders. Okay. If they could do it completely independently, then that's none of these tasks. But that reminder giving them the med box would be personal care. Versus skilled care might be if you have to open the bottle, give it a specific dose, give it to somebody, give them their water, make sure they take it, make sure they swallow it. That could be skilled level of medication reminders. Or giving a medication, if you're actually putting it in their mouth, would be skilled. Giving a medication through a G tube would also be skilled. So there's lots of ways that may look skilled. But even something as kind of more complicated as medication can fall in these different categories. All right. One of the other, or two of the other services that are available in this personal care, so this falls in the unskilled section. So under personal care, under homemaker, under health maintenance activities, there's a bunch of different tasks that might be listed within those. So some of those tasks are cleaning bathrooms. That would be a homemaker task. Or doing laundry would be a homemaker task. Doing something like feeding a meal would be a task that might be personal care or might be health maintenance. So each of these sort of services have individual tasks that are under them. Under personal care, there's these two tasks, protective oversight and accompaniment, that we get lots and lots of questions about. So I wanted to make sure I addressed those specifically. So I copied here the little definition of protective oversight and the definition of accompaniment that the state has put there, and kind of tried to bold for you some of the most important words in those. But this protective oversight is really the supervision. It has to be related to their disability, their diagnoses. So it's not supervision of a 1-year-old, because all 1-year-olds need to be supervised. It's supervision that's related to the disability. And then this imminent harm piece is a big part. And so it could be harm to self, it could be harm to other people, or it could be harm to property. And that harm to self could be due to behaviors, or people, could be due to behaviors. It can also be due to significant medical needs that could result in harm to themselves too. So, but it's this big piece of this supervision. So protective oversight isn't when you are bathing someone. That's not protective oversight. The protective oversight piece is if they don't need help with that activity necessarily, but they need supervision to ensure their safety. So maybe they don't need any help with bathing, but they need somebody to supervise them for safety during that, so they're not self-harming during that, then that could fall under protective oversight. Or if there's some other times where they really need that intensive supervision for things related to their disability beyond what's age appropriate. So, beyond the supervision you would need to give to a person their age normally, that can fall under this protective oversight piece. Accompaniment is a similar task that's available under personal care, but this is about going out places, and it is different from community connector, which is really focused on gaining skills about communication, community integration. This accompaniment is going to things the person needs to go to when they're going to need some support during that time. So if they're going to a doctor's appointment and they're going to need some support with toileting while they're at that doctor's appointment, this accompaniment would help provide somebody to be there during that doctor's appointment to help them with their personal care needs while they're there. So it's not about the supervision necessarily. It's about going out into doctor's appointments and out running errands with the person so they can do those regular daily or like out in the community tasks that need to be done and have support in order to do those with their needs. A note on both of these. So accompaniment also has a skilled level version of this. So the accompaniment under personal care would be accompaniment when they need personal care level things while they're out. You could also have skilled accompaniment that would be under that health maintenance activities if they need skilled care while they're out. So maybe they're at that doctor's appointment and they need a G tube feed while they're at that doctor's appointment. Then having somebody there to provide that support would be skilled accompaniment. So there is a skilled version of this accompaniment piece. Right now, as the system stands, there's no skilled version of this protective oversight. So if they need skilled interventions due to this supervision or skilled supervision, there's not a whole lot that is out there to fill that gap, which, if you want to get involved on policy level things, this is a fight we are perpetually actively fighting. Um, but there's just to note where there is skilled and where there is not skilled. The state has a document they're working on to help clarify this because they've recognized, and with many of our complaints, that there's a lot of confusion around protective oversight in particular and how it should be put in the service plans, how it should be authorized, all of those things. And so they're working on a document to clarify that. And they have a draft version that I've linked on the slide here, and the email address of where you can put input if you've got comments on that draft version that you can send them off to them to hopefully be incorporated. But trying to just clarify the difference between protective oversight and accompaniment and when they might each be appropriate. Okay, so the assessments, there are multiple assessments for different things within this community first choice world. So all the skilled care, so whether that's private duty nursing or CNA or this health maintenance activities that we just talked about or skilled nurse visits, they use this skilled care acuity tool that is new, which we talked a lot about 2 weeks ago. So go watch that video if you want to go more in depth on that skilled care acuity tool. Versus for personal care and Homemaker, they use what's called the Direct Care Services Calculator, or we love acronyms in this world. So the DCSC, the Direct Care Services Calculator. And they have two versions, one for children, one for adults. The adult one is pretty much the children's one with a couple things taken out of it. So we'll look at the children's one today, knowing the adult one is just the same thing, essentially. All right. So I want to talk briefly about the assessment processes, what those look like, and then we'll answer some questions and then we'll dive into the actual tools. So we'll look at what does it look like? What kind of questions are they going to be asking in those? So if somebody only has unskilled care needs or they have both, but you're only interested in unskilled care needs. So you only want to get personal care and Homemaker. There aren't any nursing level, there aren't CNA level, you don't want health maintenance activities, you just want personal care and Homemaker, then this is the process you would go through. So the case manager would complete this direct care services calculator that we'll look at in a few minutes. Then once that's completed, then the member or their family gets to choose between the service delivery model. We also did a whole presentation, actually had a guest speaker from the state who talked about those three service delivery models. And I've got a couple slides on those to share at the end too, if desired. And then the case manager or the case management agency, each agency does it a little bit different, gets to approve that service plan, and then you start. So assess, choose how you want to get it, they approve it, and then you start getting those services. If somebody has both skilled and unskilled care needs, so they have some things that fall in that medical category, or you're not sure and you just want to see what falls in what category, then this would be the process. It's longer because there's more things to evaluate. And when they start talking about those medical needs, then they want to make sure that it is having medical people evaluate medical needs. All right. So if there's possible for both of these, or you're interested in both of them, even if you have both needs, if you only want unskilled, you can follow the other process. But if there's both areas and you want to be evaluated for both, then the case manager usually would send a referral to the nurse assessor. So a nurse assessor is a nurse that works for a company contracted with the state called Telegen. And that nurse will do an evaluation. And they'll do both that skilled care acuity tool and that direct care services calculator. So that nurse will do both of those evaluations for the skilled and the unskilled. And then they will provide a recommendation letter to you and to the case manager of what those assessments showed. And then that case manager has to review it and they can make any changes. So if you look at it afterwards and say, whoa, 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 the nurse didn't ask me about medications, and we give medications 5 times a day, we need that on here. Then they can make some changes to what's on there if there's things that are missing. Or I saw one for my kiddo where they put respiratory care on there. I was like, he doesn't have any respiratory care needs. Why is this even on there? So we took that off. So the case manager can review those recommendations, figure out what is most appropriate, and make sure that it is absolutely accurate to that person's need. Then, same thing, choose the service delivery model so you know what services you qualify for. Then this is the how. How do you want to get those services? And then again, the case manager or the case management agency approves that service plan, and then you start receiving services. So there's no other layer of approval. The approval happens for all these unskilled care needs at the case management agency level. All right. If you get through this whole assessment and you don't agree with the unskilled care, again, we talked about the skilled care pieces 2 weeks ago, but if you don't agree with what your case manager has decided for these unskilled, for this personal care and homemaker services, step 1 is talk to your case manager about it. And if that doesn't go anywhere, talk to their supervisor or their supervisor's supervisor. So go up the chain at the case management agency level first and try to do so with some grace. I know it is frustrating, and there are a lot of case managers who are not doing a great job, but there are a lot of them that are trying their hardest, but they've had a ton thrown at them this last year. And so they are really trying to do a good job. They just have so much to keep up with. So try going up the chain there with the idea of like, this is new. We're all trying to figure this out. How do we come to a conclusion together? How do we figure this out together? That doesn't work. Then you've got a couple options. So one is you can escalate it to the state. So this is the healthcare policy and financing escalation team. So there or escalation ticket. So there's a link here and it goes to a form, or there's an email address there too, or I think a phone number too, if you want, that you can call and say, hey, my case management agency is not assessing this person correctly. Can you help? And I especially recommend this if it's like they are absolutely refusing to even entertain like a conversation about some service that's in here, or they seem like they are just really confused about how this policy works. It's not like that you're saying, no, they need 20 minutes a day of whatever assistance with toileting. And your case manager's like, no, they only get 5 minutes a day. And you're going back and forth. Use this, especially if you've got like major issues that they're saying, like, you don't get any homemaker hours, period. I don't think anybody should get any of those until somebody's 16. That would be a good situation to take this to the escalation. If all else fails and you're not getting anywhere and you and your case manager, case management agency cannot agree on these hours, you can ask them to give you a formal denial letter. When you get that formal denial letter, it'll have instructions on the bottom for how to appeal this decision. And so it has you, and it's this process of going to the courts. So you submit a letter to the Office of Administrative Courts, and you can say to them, I disagree with this denial. I think this kid should get more services than they are. I think they need more services. And then you take it in front of a judge, and the case manager will say to the judge why they think however many services or should be approved, and you get your chance to say, no, I disagree, and here's why I think more should be approved. And then the judge makes the final decision about that. So you have those rights. You just sometimes have to ask for a formal denial letter from the case manager. All right. Before we go into before we go over to the direct care calculator and look at it more specifically, Corinne or anybody else on the team, are there questions I should answer? Does anybody want to raise their hand and ask questions about the things we've gone through before? And then we'll look at the actual tool itself.
Yeah, there are two questions regarding the direct care service calculator, and then one that's a little off topic, but still an important question for a lot of people. Let's do that one first. It's about getting paid to be a provider of CFC services and how that might affect your SSDI qualifications, personally.
Yeah. So, and this is, yeah, a question we've seen come up a few times lately too. So, there's through Social Security, there's a couple different benefits. So, there's like the SSI benefit that is usually for people that have never worked and have a disability and whose family has low income, low assets. So that's what we often see kids on is SSI. There's also programs that adults can be on that are unable to work themselves. Whether you had a work history before, then you'd be on SSDI, or you haven't had a work history and you're on SSI. Those programs for adults are deciding, is this adult able to work or not? So, can they be substantially gainfully employed? You being employed, taking care of your own child, counts as being employed. So that counts as, if you work enough, that counts as substantial gainful employment. So if Social Security is looking at you as an individual and saying, is this person employable? And you're employed taking care of your own kid through Community First Choice or through CNA or any of those programs, then they're going to say, yes, you are employable, and they're not going to they're not going to give you those disability benefits because they're saying you're not disabled, you're able to be employed. Income that you receive from being employed. So let's say you are getting paid for providing these Community First Choice benefits for your kiddo or adult, doesn't matter. That income that you receive doesn't count towards your child's SSI eligibility. So that money doesn't count towards their eligibility, but it does count as you being employable. Hopefully that answers that question. It's super in the weeds, but it's an important one.
Yeah, I have two more questions about once they are assessed, there's hours that need to be taken into consideration. Do you want to do those after you talk about how to go through the assessment?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, I'll
Yep.
I'll bring them up again. And then another question about who should be going through the nurse assessor versus not. So this person is on IHSS now. They have HMA tasks and they want to stay on that. Should they go through a nurse assessor?
Yes. So if you are currently getting HMA tasks through IHSS, so if you've been like on the Children's Home and Community Based Waiver or CHCBS waiver, doing IHSS now, and you think that was kind of appropriate and you should keep those, then yes, you have to go through the nurse assessor in order to keep those. If you've been doing CNA right now, in the long run, you'll have to do the nurse assessor process for that too. There's kind of a weird interim pause on CNA related ones due to system overload. But generally, if somebody has any of those medical needs, you need to go through the nurse assessor. If you want to keep doing health maintenance activities, you have to go through the nurse assessor in order to keep those. Nicole. Oh yeah, did that answer it, Corinne? Yeah,
Yeah, I was gonna point it over to Nicole.
cool. Go ahead.
Thank you. I have a weird question. So we don't deal with medications, but with kidney issues, one atrophied kidney, we are noticing we're having to do electrolytes daily and water intake, like, hey, drink, 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 because he won't do it on his own. Where would that fall? Because it's not a medication, but we're seeing chronic dehydration issues and episodes of like almost going unconscious from it.
Yeah. So in the skilled care acuity assessment, so that tool for all those skilled care pieces, there's a section for monitoring like I's and O's, so intake and output. So that hydration piece often falls under that. If you're having to really carefully monitor how much hydration somebody is getting and count that. And often you're measuring their output to come with that as well. So I would say it probably falls under that skilled category piece, but just getting somebody to drink and pushing drinking would generally be a personal care, right? That's saying like, here's your water, make sure you drink it, keep drinking, you have to drink this, that would be personal care. But if there's some real medical needs and a doctor would agree that there's medical needs and they want you to carefully monitor intake and output, then that would probably fall in that skilled care piece.
Okay,
And that's
thanks.
part of what the nurse assessor's job is, to parse those out, give or take how much that's actually happening, but that's the goal of the program at least.
All right, thanks.
Yep. Adriana.
Sí, mi pregunta es, de acuerdo a lo que estaba mencionando anteriormente, ¿cuál sería la razón por la que la CIMA no introdujera los servicios de CFC?
I think they're confused and nobody wants to talk about or bring up services that they don't understand. So I think lots of the CMAs are just struggling to keep up, and the case managers don't know what's going on, so they're not always bringing it up when they should. That being said, it shouldn't be on you as a family or as a member to bring it up, but if you want to get the services, you absolutely can and should bring it up. The big piece is you can't access community first choice until your waiver renews. So if your waiver renewal month is in March every year, your case manager probably hasn't brought it up because it doesn't apply to you until you hit March of next year. So at that point, though, they should bring it up. And if they don't, you should absolutely bring it up. But between now and then, it kind of depends. And if you hit your renewal month and they haven't brought it up, then absolutely ask, because there's a lot of great services available that weren't available before, or there's things that were in waivers that are moving out of the waivers. So they need to manage that to make sure nothing gets lost in the process either way.
Gracias.
All right. I'm going to jump over to the direct care calculator, and then we can go to more questions if that works. All right. So there are two versions of this direct care calculator. And I will try to make it a little bit bigger here. Maybe. There's a children's version and an adult version. They're very similar to each other, so I'm just going to look at the kids' version right now. One thing I like to highlight on this is this line that says here, oh, it's not going to let me click on it well. This task norms are to be used as a guide to determine the typical amount of time a task may take an individual to complete. Norms, oh, now I've made it all go. Norms are not definitive and may vary depending on care needs. So each of these items will have a list of norms. So the normal amount of time they think should be allocated for that service that are very dependent upon the age of the person. Those norms are meant to be like starting points for the conversation. And then based on individual needs, the case manager could go up or down from those starting points, but they're not supposed to be the end all be all. So I like you to have that in writing if the case manager tries to say it's the norms and nothing else when you go through the assessment. Okay, so on this direct care calculator, there's two sections on this first tab. So one is Homemaker, and then the other is personal care on here. So this is where it lists out all of those individual tasks that fall under that service. So under Homemaker, here's all of the tasks that you could get paid for under them. And then it has the norms for those. And for the kids one, there's more norms on another tab that we'll look at in a minute. And then it has these sections for minutes per task, times per week. It does some math. And then there's this last column that says AME. AME stands for acquisition, maintenance, and enhancement. This is teaching. So if you're teaching the person to clean the floors, then they would mark yes on this. If you're not teaching them, if you're just doing it for them, then they would not mark it. That being said, marking it or not marking it doesn't change the amount of pay. It doesn't change the hourly rate. It doesn't necessarily change the amount of time. It's really just for their tracking purposes. And the Excel version, it has little check marks. When it converts it to Google Sheets, it says false here, but same basic idea. So each of these, they can either mark that it is teaching or not teaching. Okay, so this one says, so the floor care, the norm is 15 minutes per room per week. Okay, so I could mark on here, this is, okay, I would say like, yeah, that norm sounds right. This would be 15 minutes. And let's say we do 7 rooms per week, then that comes out to 105 minutes per week of floor care. I could say, yes, I'm teaching them to do this. So I'm going to mark yes here. Okay. And then they can go through each of these individual tasks that same way. A big piece to note for Homemaker is it's supposed to be both beyond what's age appropriate, so beyond what a parent would typically do for somebody that age, and it needs to be specific to that one person. So when I clean my master bathroom that my kiddos never use, that doesn't count on here. All that counts on here is cleaning the bathroom my kiddo uses, not the bathrooms the rest of the family members use. So this is specific to their areas. So they do this for each of these tasks. Some of them have norms on them already. Some of them say this IND. This IND means they couldn't come up with norms. It's very individualized based on each person. So this last tab on here has this age appropriate norms and definitions. So this is one to be well acquainted with. This first tab is really just math. This last tab is what gives you good descriptions. So for this tab, make it a little bit smaller so you can see all the things. For each of these, it has a definition. So it's saying, okay, floor care is mopping, sweeping, vacuuming. Got it. And then it has these different age ranges and what the norms it would consider for each of those age ranges. So like floor care for 0 to 71 months. So that's saying 0 through 5 years old. They're saying that would be a typical parental thing to clean the floors. They don't think any 5-year-olds are taking significant responsibility for cleaning the floors. So they don't think any minutes is like should be given for kids that age. The main discrepancy or the main way that a case manager could add minutes here, even if though it says the norm is 0 minutes, is if for some reason that 0 to 5-year-old is causing extreme messes that are requiring lots and lots of floor cleaning beyond what would be needed for a normal 0 to 5-year-old. So if the parents are having to clean the floors all the time because of something related to that 0 to 5-year-old's disability, then they could still, in theory, get minutes. But if it's about normal floor cleaning, then they can't get any minutes for that floor care. So same thing for each of these tasks. So it'll go through and say what is typically recommended. So taking out the trash. So this one, they have 0 minutes through 10 years old. I think a 10-year-old can take trash out, but they used fancy people to make this decision. So there you go. But versus a 18-year-old, they said should be able to take their own trash out. So if you're doing it for them, that's about 5 minutes to take the trash out. And you can do that for however many times it needs to happen in any given week. Meal planning is another one. So this is this preparation piece. This isn't the actual feeding of somebody. It's just preparing the meals for them and preparing snacks for them. So it's all the setup stuff, not the actual eating. And then they have timelines for what they think. Again, this should be the portion of it that is for that specific person, not for the whole family. And that gets really hard to parse out. Like you made dinner for the whole family. How much of that should be allocated to the person that you're doing this calculator for? But that's sort of the nuance of the conversation that needs to be had with the case manager. So you can see those kind of norms for each of these tasks. And then when it gets down to things like shopping, then those are more for the older ages because most parents are buying all the groceries and all the things for their kiddos themselves. They're going out to the store. They're doing that. They're not expecting their 8-year-old to go to the store and get their own groceries. Okay. But then things like appointment management. So this is the process of planning, coordinating general oversight of appointments to achieve healthcare goals. And these are, it just says individualized for all of that. So this is the time you spend coordinating doctor's appointments beyond just their annual physical and like dentist appointments every 6 months. So beyond the normal. This also wouldn't count like they have an ear infection and you need to coordinate a doctor's appointment. But if you need to coordinate follow-ups with neurology and cardiology and all of that coordination piece, not going to the appointments, but coordinating them falls under this task. Also, all of that back and forth with the speech therapist. What time are they coming? Well, they need to switch to this time this week. Okay, well, what about next week? What's that going to look like? That is this appointment management that is beyond what is typical for a parent to have to do for their typically developing kiddo. Same for money management. This one gets a little bit more challenging because most of the time our money management is fairly typical for kiddos, but for adults, this becomes more of a task. So this isn't necessarily spending all of their money, but it's the oversight of it and can include some of that saving and spending and stuff too. All right. Then this has the same section for personal care where it has all of these norms that are based on ages. But in the personal care, you'll see this other little box here that says what might make this skilled. So bathing could be typical parental responsibility. So when they say there's 0 minutes for 0 to 5-year-olds, they're saying we think it's typical parental responsibility for parents to bathe 0 to 5-year-olds. Or is it personal care? So they're helping with this bathing piece, helping regulate the water temperature, helping wash and dry, making sure they can shower, like wash their hair appropriately, giving them reminders and what that might look like. But then there's this section to consider that, or does this bathing fall under skilled? So if any of these things apply, then this should be falling under health maintenance activities or CNA or private duty nursing, one of those tasks instead of falling under personal care. So sometimes you won't get hours under personal care, not because there isn't a need. Sometimes it'll be because the need is typical parental responsibility. And sometimes it's because the need is skilled and it should fall in a different section that gets paid at a higher rate. So each of these tasks has this what might make it skilled section that's super helpful if you're not sure, like where does bathing fall for my kiddo or adult? Okay, so then same thing for dressing, skincare, all of the things. And then it also has under this personal care. Sorry if I make you motion sick with all the scrolling. It has this hygiene section where they put a bunch of things all together. So it has grooming, shaving, hair combing, doing nails, and brushing teeth all under this hygiene section. And then it breaks those out by what makes it each of those tasks skilled here as well. And then there is the protective oversight as well. So it's got this description here. And then here it says for 0 to 59 months. So you can do the math on whatever the age that is. So that's through 4, I think. Yeah, until their 5th birthday. They don't think any protective oversight is appropriate. But then beyond 5, they're saying it's individualized based on the member's need. Remember, these are all norms. These are places to start with. If there's an extraordinary situation, you should absolutely ask for that and talk about how any individual situation is extraordinary for that supervision piece. And then same for accompaniment. So where does that fall? And then exercises on here. Exercise is not available as personal care. So it's only skilled, but they show you kind of what things might make that skilled, which is helpful here as well. So then all of those pieces go on this first tab in the numbers. So they calculate this all out. So 30 minutes a meal. And let's say you do 21 meals a week. So 3 meals a day. And that comes out to 630 meals or 630 minutes, which comes out to 10.5 hours a week. So then it'll come down here and it'll calculate those pieces out. If you did the nurse assessor piece and they have recommended these health maintenance activities or HMA, and they would copy those numbers over from here. So let's say they said you got 70 hours a week of health maintenance activities too. Then all those numbers come in here. Let's go in there. And then there's a couple pieces. So personal care stays like it is. Health maintenance stays like it is. And then Homemaker has to be either left in regular Homemaker or switched to Homemaker provided by a legally responsible person. So out of all these services, there's one limit of you can only do 16 hours per day. One person can only do 16 hours per day of any combo of Medicaid paid services. There's a second limit that a legally responsible person, so that's a parent of a child, not a parent of an adult, a parent of a child, or a spouse of an adult, can only be paid for 10 hours per week of Homemaker. So let's go back. I'm going to throw some other numbers in here so it comes out to being more. This is 21. I'm just throwing numbers out here so we get higher numbers here. There we go. All right. So if we've got 22.75 of Homemaker per week, I could put 10 of those here. And then I can change this, that this would only be 12.75 then. As I fight with Excel sheets, 12.7. Okay, so it equals out to the same number of hours, but I'm saying, well, 10 of those hours will be done by a parent, and then the other 12.75 will be done by somebody else. And then these are the total hours per week. If you go through the nurse assessor process, they give you an answer for health maintenance activities that you disagree with. That's the other tab on this sheet, is where your case manager can go through those health maintenance activities, fill out this chart, and then can justify why they're disagreeing from what the nurse assessor said and why more is needed. In theory, that shouldn't need to happen very often. In theory. All right. Questions on the direct care calculator itself. I highly, highly recommend you guys look at these before going through the assessments with the case manager, just so you've had a time to think, because it's really hard when somebody asks you on the spot, how often do you do laundry for them? How long does it take you to do just their laundry? Come up with a number. And it's really intimidating. So having had time to sit and think about it, or go through a week and be like, yeah, how often did I do their laundry this week? And kind of wrap your head around those when you're not on the spot is super, super valuable. Jessica, go ahead, and then we can do some questions from the chat too.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, so we did the direct care services calculator, and our case manager said, you know, we would get like 23 hours a day of care because of behaviors. And then we did the nurse assessor and got cut about, I think it was like 50 to 60 hours per week. Our case manager wanted the original hours because she was here, she saw the need. I believe she did what's called the exemption form or exception form.
Mm-hmm.
Our hours are still less. So I did email the people at HICPUF, and she seemed a little upset that I filled out that services care calculator. And I was like, well, I needed to be prepared, right? You know.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering who really decides the hours, because our case manager is on board with us in our original hours, but the nurse assessor kind of screwed us, and I don't know how to get those hours back.
So the Homemaker and personal care hours are 100% by your case management agency. So sometimes some case management agencies give the case managers themselves authority to say yes, no. And some have supervisors or other teams that are reviewing them to say yes or no. So the personal care and the Homemaker are absolutely by your case manager, and they should have the authority to approve that, as long as their internal boss isn't telling them no. The health maintenance activities is supposed to be assessed by the nurse assessor, but then your case manager is supposed to do this attestation tab if there's a reason they disagree, and fill in these different things in the justification. And then they're supposed to be able to approve it as it is once they've documented all that justification. That being said, what is happening and what's supposed to happen are not always often the same thing. And so, yeah, I would want to dive into that a little bit more if they did this justification process and are still being told no. Ultimately, though, if it's no, and they're absolutely refusing, then they need to issue a denial letter that you can then appeal and take to the courts and take it in front of a judge and say, no, this isn't right. And that's who's going to ultimately be able to make the decision. But your case manager should be able to, as long as it's within the health maintenance stuff, or somebody at their agency should be able to. So if they're not, reach out to us and we can dive into that more.
All right, yeah, sounds good. Because the nurse assessor didn't even account for the orthotics that my son wears. He's 6 in full-time diapers. She didn't count any of that as necessary. So I was like, we got to fix that.
Yep.
Exactly. All right, I'll get your email and get on a call with you. Thanks, Megan.
Sounds good. Yep. Questions from the chat I should address publicly, Corinne, before we stop the recording?
Yeah, there's another question about, most of them are about after you get the hours and you're working with your case manager and you disagree with your case manager, what do you do? Kind of like the question that was just brought up out loud. Another one is, so the case manager is telling them that they're limited to 16 hours a day. So there's a difference between what the individual can provide, but what the kid should be assessed for. So that's a good question to talk about.
Yeah. So the total number of hours on this at the end should be however many that individual needs, up to, well, it could even exceed. So 24 hours a day is 168 hours in a week. But it could even exceed that if you've got a homemaker that doesn't require the person to be there for. But in theory, this whole assessment should be done purely based on what that member needs, regardless of who is providing any of that care, going all the way up to 24 hours a day of care. Then, when you translate those hours that are being assessed to who's providing them, that's when those limits come into place. But the assessment should not be about who's providing the care and how many hours they're allowed to provide or not. So I can't even remember, 16 hours a day comes to 112 a week, I think. This number here can exceed that and should not be stopped arbitrarily at 112 hours by any means. This number should be based on the member, not based on who's providing the care. And I will say that 12 times over because it's so important and we're seeing so many case managers say differently. Now, if the kiddo qualifies for 20 hours a day, then you're going to have multiple people providing that care. One person is not allowed to be paid for 20 hours of care a day, but that's between the home health agency, if you're working through a home health agency, or the PASA, or if you're doing CDAS with the financial management people. So it depends on who you're actually billing services is in charge of enforcing that 16 hours per day. But the case manager has nothing to do with the 16 hours per day piece, other than telling you that it exists, perhaps.
While on this topic of case manager oversight, once the service plan is all created, where does that go? Is there somebody else that needs to approve it? Is there prior authorization required? What happens?
It depends. Well, so it all happens at your case management agency level. So if you're in Denver, Adams County with Rocky Mountain Human Services, if you're in Colorado Springs with TRE, it all happens at that level for all health maintenance, personal care, and homemaker activities. So in some agencies, the case manager themselves gets to say, yep, and approve it and put it in the system. Some agencies have another team that does that part of the process, but it doesn't go to the state. It doesn't go to Telegen. It doesn't go to Centra. It stays at the case management agency, gets approved at the case management agency level.
And you mentioned 10 hours being the max for a legally responsible person to provide for Homemaker. What do you do with those extra, as an example in here, 12.75 hours?
Find someone else to come in and help you. So those extra hours are allowed to be worked. It just can't be worked by a legally responsible person. So I could have Sally, who lives next door, who wants to work some extra hours, come over and clean while my kiddo's at school. I could have my 21-year-old child. I don't have a 21-year-old child, but if I did, my 21-year-old who lives at home still do some extra cleaning for their sibling on the weekend using those Homemaker hours. So they can absolutely still be used. Just can't, those specific hours at 12.75 in this example can't be done by a parent or a spouse.
There was another. It's hard to listen to the answers and read the questions all at the
Oh,
same
no.
time.
Oh,
Okay. There's a question about if the skilled care needs are likely very low, but probably more than zero. Should they go ahead and do a nurse assessor, or should they waive that?
it is totally up to you. I will say, so skilled care pays at a higher rate. And if your kiddo has skilled care, your adult has skilled care needs, you absolutely have a right to get those needs assessed and to you or somebody else be paid for providing those skilled care needs. That being said, as a mom with my mom hat on, sometimes jumping through the hoops just isn't worth it. So if I'm going to get, 5 hours a day of skilled care needs, it is absolutely worth it to jump through those hoops to get the assessment done, to get the care needs done. But if I'm going to get 30 minutes a week of skilled care needs, it's probably not worth it to me as a mom to jump through all those hoops, go through the nurse assessor, go through that whole process. It would be like, as a mom, I would gladly give up those 30 minutes a week in order to not have such a stressful process with delays and all of those sort of pieces to be able to get those health maintenance activities. So it's really up to you. You have absolutely every right to, but there might be situations where it's just not actually worth the trouble.
What
Another
about
one.
over 40 hours a week? Are family caregivers still limited to 40 hours per week?
Yeah, so this is an old thing that is still lingering in documentation around. So it used to be for adults that could do CDOS, and I think under IHSS too, parents or family members in general were limited to 40 hours per week of services they could provide. That went away with Community First Choice, and the only limits left is this: Homemaker of 10 hours per week and 16 hours per day, no matter who's providing it, parent or not. The 40 hours per week is no longer in place at this time. Small caveat: if you haven't heard, we're in a budget crisis, that I would not be surprised if some sort of limit comes back at some point as they deal with the budget crisis. But as things sit right now, that 40-hour per week is not in place anymore, except if you're on the SLS waiver and you haven't done your renewal for Community First Choice yet. But anybody whose kids or anybody starting Community First Choice, that 40 hours per week is not in place. All right. I'm going to stop recording then.